Hopefully the screen recording works. Guys, welcome back to another episode of 0 to 60. I wanted to do a quick video on the TurboLamik clutch sleep strategy. I've been wanting to do this for a little while. It's something that not many people need to use, and I think it should be used with a sensible amount of caution because you can hurt things. But the other reason I wanted to really do this video, I've noticed on the beta test firmware that this partial strategy is being activated, which might catch some people out if you like doing burnouts, which we'll talk about in the second half of this video. So if you don't want to damage your clutch and you're running the beta software, make sure you pay attention. Guys, now something that, let's just preface this with a few little bits of information. Hopefully you've already watched the video regarding the torque calculation. If you haven't, go and watch that first. That's much more of a basic thing to be aware of before you start looking at clutch pressures and this side of the TurboLamik. Also, I do mention in the other video, it's also really important that you have a bit of an idea as to what's going on inside the 8HP, how the 8HP gets its data in regards to speed sensors and that sort of stuff, what's going on with clutches, how clutches engage for different gears and all that sort of stuff. If you've got that understanding, it'll make this make a lot more sense. So please go and do that first if you haven't already. Yeah, so explaining this. Now, let's dumb down the gearboxes a little bit. Let's think of them as two different sections. We've got the torque converter in the front of the gearbox. Torque converter, I don't think anybody actually knows how a torque converter works, but what they do, RPM comes into a torque converter from the engine. There is turbines, fins, and magic that goes on inside, and depending on RPM and load, that RPM will be transferred through the torque converter and into the gearbox. Now, traditionally, older torque converters they're preset. You can't change what they do once you're in the car. That's why there's people that have made careers out of building torque converters. It's very hard to get right depending on load, power that's being made. It takes a lot of work to dial in a traditional old-fashioned torque converter. With these 8HPs, and probably one of the reasons they're such an efficient gearbox, alongside the hydraulic side of the torque converter, we've got an electronic clutch that we can lock up, and we can lock it up whenever we want. But that's how the 8HP has such an exact torque converter lockup feature, I guess, and why they're so efficient. Now, when you get into the other half of the box, that's where all the gears are. Now, the gear system on an 8HP, it's really hard to sort of follow if you take one apart and you're looking at all the components. It's hard to trace how the torque is going in one end and out the other. But to summarize quickly, we've got 5 clutch packs. Those 5 clutch packs are used to give you 8 gear ratios, and you need 3 clutches engaged to get one of the 8 ratios at any point in time. And to do reverse, we engage 4 clutches at once. There are clutches and brakes. I hope that makes sense as to why reverse works. But essentially, that's what to do. So to get forward motion, we need to engage 3 clutches at once, and it will transfer whatever's coming into it out the back of the box. So let's have a look at the Lamik clutch pressure page, which is where we're going to be spending most of our time. And try and explain to you guys how this clutch sleep strategy works. Now, I am in the RX-7. This car needs clutch sleep strategy. If I use, well, up until the current beta firmware, normally without clutch sleep on, you need to have a converter that will allow the engine to sit where it wants to sit, because as soon as you put it into gear, it engages 3 clutches. So whatever's coming into the clutches is going out to the tail shaft, and it all relies on converter slip. Now, with the TurboLamik, I will start it up. Maybe. So with the TurboLamik, you can actually see here, this lockup slipped, and hopefully you've got my, hopefully you can see what I'm looking at here, but we've got the lockup slipped. Now that is the amount of converter lockup. That value is calculated based on engine RPM minus or positive of the input RPM of the gearbox. There is a speed sensor just on the basically there's a speed sensor on the input of the gearbox. So it picks up whatever the torque converter can send through. And you can see here, it's hovering between minus and plus 2%. So that's as the converter bounces around off itself on the hydraulic side of itself, and it ends up with that converter slip value. The other really important figure that we need to pay attention to when you're doing this sort of thing is the slipped gear clutch gauge. Now that is a percentage of slip between the input and the output of the gearbox. What's the best way to word this? Keep in mind that that is a calculation based on the current active gear ratio. So as it changes gear, it needs to calculate how much of each gear is ending up at the output shaft. So when you're driving these things, you will see slipped gear on the gear change. And if you're doing anything with a gear engagement or disengagement, you will get variations on what you see on the live data side. So don't freak out. But as a rule of thumb, if you are driving and there's no reason for the clutches to be slipping, that slip gauge should be 0. Now let's go over to clutch pressures. That's this dashboard here. And right along the top are the most important ones. We've got clutch 1 through to clutch 5. They are for the gear clutches, the clutches that we use to engage a gear. Clutch 6 is the turbine. Now, when you engage a gear with clutch sleep strategy enabled, instead of engaging 3 clutches at once, it only engages 2 clutches, and then you get to tune how the third clutch is, how oil pressure is fed to the third clutch, and that will basically fine-tune your take-up. It makes it like a DCT. This is how a DCT works. It's only got 2 clutches, but when you put a DCT into gear, the clutches are open. And then as you try and take up, it starts to close the clutch. So we're doing exactly that, but with an 8-speed. So you can see here, I've just put it into first gear. We're in program mode 1, which is auto mode, and we've got full clutch pressure. Clutch pressures on the TurboLamik are 0 to 250. We've got full clutch pressure on the clutch 1 or the A clutch, and full clutch pressure on clutch 4 or the C clutch. Now, clutch 2, the B clutch, that has only got 6. And that's because that's the clutch that we're going to use for take-up. Now, what we can do with the clutch sleep, I'm not going to get into all of the parameters of the clutch sleep. It's something you're going to have to play with in your car and just dial in for what works for your car. I've set this up on a few cars now, and these are the lowest numbers I've used. This is the lightest car making the least amount of torque. But you've got minimum pressures for neutral, drive, and when you take your foot brake off. The foot brake off one is the main one to be aware of. You can see here that I'm going to add 20% pressure when I take my foot off, and hopefully you can see in the window here, as I let the brake off now, it starts applying another bit of pressure and the car starts to move. Now, that's the main one that I sort of fine-tune to get take-up working, or to get the car to creep. One thing that isn't ideal with this clutch strategy, it uses that value for forwards and reverse, and as you get more involved in 8 speeds, not all gear ratios require the same amount of clutch pressure to give the same amount of torque handling. So when you're sitting at idle like this, there's not a lot of base pressure in the gearbox. So even though the controller is sending full clutch pressure to the clutches, the amount of pressure that's being sent to the clutches is minimal because we've got low base pressure. So I've gone into neutral, we'll go to reverse. So you can see now we've got full pressure on the clutch 5 and clutch 1. It's still going to use clutch 6 to slip. So I'll let the foot off the brake, pressure gets applied to the clutch, but you can see here the car's not moving backwards as fast. I need to give it a little bit of throttle, and then we get the creep. So on all the cars I've set up, I've noticed that happens. I guess I try and tune it so that it creeps forward for normal use. In reverse, you do need to apply a little bit of pressure, bring the revs up, increase the torque, and then it feeds a little bit more pressure in. What does sort of happen with the other tables? So the main ones that you'll want to work with is the RPM pressure correction and the torque multiplier. So the base maps have these values filled in. From memory, the base map torque pressure correction is 80%, and the RPM pressure multiplier on the base map is, I think it's higher as well. But these are the settings that I use, and this controls how the transmission, let the clutch pressure feed in. So I'll let my foot off the brake and we'll sit on the handbrake. What these two tables do will affect how fast the B clutch goes from 26 to 250. And we go like that. Now, there's no definitive way to get this set up. On the GDR that I set up nearly a year ago now, that one, the base values were pretty spot on. I changed the add pressure with the foot brake off a little bit, but it dialed it in pretty quickly. But it's just a matter of fine-tuning how the pressure is applied to these clutches, and you do it all with this window here. And what works? Foot off the brake, feed some pressure in, car creeps forwards. Now, where this setting is dangerous, and I mean dangerous, we have had someone that's melted a gearbox, not being aware of what they're doing. Not their fault, you don't know what you don't know. But where this setting is dangerous is when you're doing a brake stand. So when you're trying to do a burnout, which a lot of people do with these gearboxes. So I can put the car into drive right now. We've got full pressure on the C clutch and the A clutch. As I apply pressure with the accelerator, so we're up to 20, revs are coming up, But this is just enough, I'm going to stop doing it because the trans will get hot, but that's just enough clutch pressure to get the car to creep at 1800 RPM. At 3000 RPM, that's a lot of slide. If I feed a heap of pressure in, we got to 60. Now this car's still not tuned. We got to 60 then on the clutch pressure. That's not enough. To do a brake stand, you need full 250. There's no way currently that I can make this car do everything we need it to do in regards to doing a burnout. Yeah, so just keep that in mind. If you're gonna do this, if this value here is not at 250, it's not applying full pressure to the clutches and you're probably getting clutch slip. And if you're doing a brake stand, you're gonna hurt it. Okay, what else did I want to talk about? The new firmware. One thing I will say, so although you lose the ability to have a trans brake with this function, trans brake is no longer there, because we don't lock the clutches and you need to lock the clutches to do trans brake. You do have the option of doing a race start, which I believe, if I go to mode 3, yeah, so that's race start active. So what you can do, if you're using the clutches for take up, you turn on your launch. Now launch it uses the clutches to launch. So you can have quite a high RPM and then it will apply pressure to the clutches much faster. You can dial all this in, but I'll give you a quick demo of what this car does. You can listen to it. We'll apply the clutch pressure, bring the revs up. That's too much. I'll bring the revs up. We'll launch around 4.5, no, 4. So it immediately takes off. We're in second gear all of a sudden. But you can still do a race start. It immediately broke the tyres loose. There was a little bit of slip and then at about, I don't know, 2 or 3 feet in, the tyres come loose. So you can still have your cool, fast race starts with clutch sleep strategy. The only thing you can't really do are brake stands. Brake stands are not a thing with clutch sleep. So let's go to another car and I'll show you what the 10.74 firmware is doing. Okay, well, I'm in the new 8-speed Land Cruiser. This is the thing we've been testing out our new kits on. I'm going to use my phone to record the laptop. I know it's not ideal, but when I record the laptop with screen recording, every time I upload to the TurboLamik, it drops out the recording. So let me get the phone on. We are here. This car, I was using the 10.74 firmware because we've been testing the Toyota, new genuine Toyota shifter. It's a nice shifter. And it's cheap compared to a BMW shifter. I like it. Right, so the issue with 10.74 firmware, and I think I touched on it earlier in the video, right now you can see I'm in gear. In fact, let me show you, because I've already got them open. In fact, just so there's no confusion, let's download the map from the car. So we've now downloaded the map from the car. Enable slipped. All of the enable slips are off. But what I think's happening on 10.74, it seems to be enabling the semi-slipped strategy. So basically, you can see here, we have minimum clutch pressure drive. That's currently set to 25. And we're looking at our 5 clutches there. If I put it into gear, full pressure on the C clutch, the A clutch, but the B clutch is working like we're in sleep strategy. So even though all the sleep strategy is off. So just something to be aware of. If you're using the 10.74 firmware, you're not locking the clutches immediately. Now I will just show you quickly. This take-up method, it's quite nice. Foot off the brake, feeds clutch pressure in. It's quite gentle. It's nice. For a normal car, it's a great take-up. Where it's a problem, and why I wouldn't run it on one of these cars, is even with changes to the torque multiplier, the RPM, everything that you can tune on the sleep strategy, I can't lock the clutches fast enough for the speed that this engine creates torque. So if you're towing, you'll blow through the clutches, or if you've got a performance car and you're trying to do a burnout, let me show you what happens. So I think, actually I'll just check as well, because I was playing with this before. The torque pressure correction, oh, it's still 80%. I think 80% is standard. But with torque pressure percent at 80, you put it in drive. I've got my foot on the brake. And as we try and accelerate, you keep an eye on the 25. So it only got up to 102. The car's not really moving. I can feel this tension, but watch the slip gauge. That's bad for the clutches. That's how you hurt the clutches. back to drive. Now, if I set the minimum pressure for drive to 250, which is full pressure. Oh yeah, I haven't saved it. That's fine. Upload. And we'll go back to the clutch pressure. And we put it into drive now. It didn't save. What did I do wrong? Oh, what did I change? And I play with this stuff all day and I still make mistakes every now and again. If you're struggling to learn a TurboLamik, don't feel bad. It takes a long time. All right, we've got full pressure now. Felt the car jerk as it applied full pressure to the clutches. So all three clutches are at 250. The same thing with the brake. Yeah, I can't hold it. And if I do hold it, the car lifts up. Yeah, so just something to be aware of. If you're running 10.74, make sure that you're not still running a sleep strategy accidentally. Because yeah, this car, it is not enabled and it's definitely functioning. And if I wasn't trying to do a brake stand, or if I wasn't towing something heavy, I probably wouldn't notice. This is why it's called beta firmware. Yeah, it's very easy to make a mistake with these things, so be aware. Learn. You should learn. Understanding the clutch pressure is the best way you can go about it for this thing. And having a good understanding of what's going on with the clutch pressure display, so you can see when it's applying full pressure to the clutches or when it's not, whatever it's doing, and having an understanding of why it would be doing that makes it much easier to set these things up. As always with these videos, if there's any questions, drop them down in the comments. I will always endeavor to reply as quickly as I can. Yeah, and if you're setting up sleep strategy and you want some tips, let me know. It's fairly easy. You just got to dial in for the car. Guys, thank you for watching. Enjoy your 8 speeds.